David Hamby and his team that we worked with for some of the alignments and what all the alignments that have been exhausted based on word from property owners or railroad or other, energy company, all of these things, and what has been, I haven't been involved in all those conversations, but the determinations have been made that those are not feasible and viable alignments by leadership in NSO. So those are not on the table for this conversation about closing the loop in the short term. They also would not meet the goal of being in a $2 million range to be able to really talk about something in the near term without a lot of unpredictability of ability to go get something like a raise or build grant, a bigger $25 million grant. So this is what we're looking at. I'd be happy to hear if you have any thoughts or comments about these, although we're going to be asking the public to share their preferences and then also any thoughts or feedback they have about any of the alignments. So we could go into then bringing back to you a list to understand what the public preference is and other things that may need to be considered as you're making that decision. Is there something you're not seeing that you would like us to ask about or show differently or for us to clarify information about for?
I will point out on this legend, there is a 3C, pretend that doesn't.
Oh. Oh, there you go. It's invisible.
Yep.
That's the one where you teleport yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one where you fly. So
We have a comment from Jenny.
Okay. Yes, Jenny.
Hi, thanks for sharing this. This was one I got a lot of feedback from when I was asking around what people wanted me to bring to this meeting. For 3A in pink, would that involve any signal changes or is it too early to say? What I heard from people is when cars are turning right from 6th onto the bridge, they're not really looking for bikes and pedestrians crossing.
Sure. So 3A goes, technically you can't tell from this image, but it's a previous proposal that's been around for a long time and it goes under the bridges.
Oh,
so it is great. Yes, it will grade separate those crossings.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Why doesn't that pink go just straight under the bridge to the green line at Johnston Park?
Because that would require a flyover that does not meet our reasonable, feasible cost.
Oh, well, if it goes under the bridge. Oh, and I don't know.
There's an elevation issue and some of the conversations previously with Evergy at that corner, like it gets into this area where it's more wish and less practical feasible to be able to deliver.
And so it would come south again next to the bridge, parallel to the bridge.
Yes, it has to go around that substation.
But below the bridge, beneath the bridge. It wouldn't ever go up it's not on the bridge. You totally avoid that intersection.
Yes. Yeah.
That's okay. That's cool.
That was a proposal, Mike Myers, I think, from a long time ago, worked on that. And it's been around. There's some preliminary drawings for that.
Which side of the railroad tracks is it on?
South.
So this,
It's
good
like elevated, yeah.
Yeah,
and the loop there where it either goes in front of City Hall or behind City Hall, that's not that it would necessarily do both. It's that we would need to study that part and make a determination in additional things. So we showed both kind of right now.
Yeah. But I know the railroad's really nervous about going across the bridge, but then it goes across the railroad tracks at an unmarked crossing to go through Constant Park. So it's that way.
Yes. And I do believe that's something that the North Lawrence Corridor Study has additionally been asked to explore is conversations about some grant funding that's available for rail crossing improvements and safety stuff. And so that part is in the study area. And so I expect there may be some additional work that larger team does around some of those crossings.
Cool.
We can do all of the above. I mean, I just personally, I think 2B and 3B, the B routes look great in terms of just if they're fully developed with a really high quality bikeway infrastructure. There are just so many cumulative benefits that people could have for downtown, great for downtown businesses, great for pedestrians. There's so many things, but I can also see that, the benefits for 2C, even 2A. 2A is a little out of the way. It's probably not as good for local businesses, but possibly quieter. Some people may enjoy that kind of ride. And 2C, of course, I mean, is that New Hampshire? On New Hampshire, I mean, that could be, part of a critical link as well. So
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So it's possible that some of these other alignments could end up as part of the bikeway network, but not part of what we consider closing the loop. And let's talk about what that would mean. So the part that we're talking about for closing the loop, the expectation about the loop and developing the loop has been shared use paths. So we're talking specifically about shared use path alignment in that space. So that also then plays into prioritization, because whatever ends up as part of the loop, it technically has already been part of the priority network, which means that it would be prioritized for implementation. Whereas the other elements still could be part of the bikeway network, but they may not get prioritized in the same way based on our conversation about which things you want to prioritize. Because you can't prioritize everything, right? So I think it's not exclusive. It's just there's some varying degrees of, is it on the bikeway network and what are we translating for the intention based on how we designate it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Everybody, if you think of something else that, you've seen this now, if you think of something else and you want to ask us whether or not we can answer it or not, well, that at least gives us a heads up about stuff we'll need to prepare for the open house. And we have detailed stuff we're working on kind of for each of these alignments and things that have to be considered in terms of, right of way acquisition or property, buy-in or negotiation or other risk and considerations with the alignment and some other things. But the hope is that we can identify something that allows us to close the gap in this, particularly this very critical segment where we have people using a street side segment that is on the vulnerable road user high injury network, and recognizing the expectations from the community and the desire to have this gap closed.
That was a good clarification too, that it's a shared use path designation being for the Lawence Loop, so that it's gonna be bike and ped.
Yeah.
So that would be a consideration when you're downtown.
Yeah, there's some ways where you can divert, if we decide if there's too much conflict, you could stripe it, or you can do some bikes and the ped, you can separate. But that would, we haven't had some of those conversations yet, but maybe we need to for a high intensity area. Okay.
Comments on this one?
Okay, so here we're looking at Sandra Shaw to North Michigan. There's some considerations we have here. Part of what we call the current loop, which is around Sandra Shaw, does not meet the shared use path standard. And so if the goal is really shared use path, then the expectation or work in this space may need to be to choose an alignment that does not use that part of the green section between right there, in that section, because without a very expensive project, there's not a lot of feasibility to widen that without a lot of earthwork. So as we look at some of these other options, this would be one where option along 6 is a likely far more expensive option. It involves some more considerations about a rail crossing and some other features that are going to make it on the far more expensive end of some of these other options. And so that will be a consideration in this space. 4D is very similar to the project that we just, minus the change where we connected it back around at a different spot to around Sandra Shaw to get it to be like what we would intend to maybe design there to make it all shared use path standard. But it is very similar to the project that we just handed back. It's still determined to be feasible. It's a cost conversation in terms of budget, because I think it, from when that originally started and was conceptualized, went up in price. related to property acquisition. And then there's some other alignments in there to connect back to a Michigan Street option, then that would then be a a side path, shared use path along Michigan Street in that location. So again, we're going to be asking people about preference. You'll have some additional information about kind of looking at all those costs. I think the long-term vision from staff perspective is that if the loop really is intended to be shared use path, we need to design it entirely as shared use path and not have sections that don't meet that standard. If you bike there, you have to slow way down because it's sidewalk and the curve and the oncoming. Yes, oncoming and the, because that's an active park. There's some other considerations there, so. This is one where when we have a final conversation, we could always have the option to show a short-term closure option and a long-term closure option. So think about that. If we want to talk about something short-term and then leave something on a more visionary thing, it can be part of the network or a longer-term alignment. We've done that in a couple older bike plans that maybe that's a choice here. So I want you to, not think as we come into, once we hear from the community what they prefer. Thoughts about any of these? Okay. Ready to our third gap. We're going to solve all the problems. It's easy when I've said please don't select one yet, right? Because we want to be able to vet that conversation with the public and have you to have hopefully open minds about what the public tells us about all of these different options. Okay. So there's a couple different things. The bike plan shows one thing, Parks and Rec has shown a different thing in this area in terms of alignments. We believe there's really two options after you go past 7, which is 7A and 7B. Those are your choices kind of in that space for loop. And we'll look at, again, cost and some considerations here. One's on the current road alignment, one's in some greenfield with proposed development. I mean, those lines, these are obviously when you're in this green space, these can move a little more, maybe based on crossings and stuff when you get into, some of the feasibility stuff beyond concept, but this is kind of what we're looking at in this. Probably no surprises here. All of those lines are currently on the bikeway plan. The more northern one, we maybe adjusted them a little bit, but the more northern one is what's currently called the loop. So, priority. Thank you.
Say that again.
The northern one, so 7 and 7A is the alignment that is what we currently have called the priority network or plan for the loop.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it has to stay. I think this is a space where we would like to hear the public. There's some elevation challenges on 7B if you're talking about accessibility in the future. Again, if it's shared use path and it's for all users.
Or property acquisition differences between those?
We are waiting for some information back from our internal team. And they're looking at planning level estimates, so we're not gonna get into all the details, but I think we may see if there's a variation. That may help us decide, that may be a trade-off that helps us decide, or it may, again, all of those could still be on the bikeway map. It may just be one of them gets chosen to be prioritized as part of what we consider the loop. Okay. So those are the 3 separate areas where we have gaps that we're planning to have a larger open house and conversation with the public. And then we would bring all of the feedback that we hear from that process from a comment form online. We'll probably do that for a 2-week period and have an open house in that time. And then bring any of that back to you before we would be asking you to make a final recommendation on any of those specific alignments. Any thoughts or questions about that?
What's the timeline for?
We're looking we're looking at, I think we have an early week of February meeting reserved already, and we would put a press release out at least 2 weeks in advance of that. And so we would have to then, our plan would be, you gotta have the comment form and some of your materials live by that point, so that would be us having that prepared by mid-January. So you would see an announcement from us at least 2 weeks in advance of a meeting and with materials and a comment form online, so people can have a chance to review it before they come back to the house to ask questions. And take a survey, so that allows all of your groups to share that opportunity and to both electronically and in person. To do that, but that's kind of our expectation about how we do meetings.
It's the elevation of 7A compared with 7B.
I don't know.
7B's got quite a long.
Yes, it does. It does. I don't know that off the top of my head, but that's what I was mentioning, is that there's some considerations there about true accessibility, although could be considered accessible if the road also has that slope that meets accessibility standards, but that doesn't truly necessarily make it as accessible.
7B by Martin Park.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's
pretty big
yes,
hill.
yes.
Yeah, we rode.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, it's still fresh in
So,
7A would, I think, would stay at the same level all the way. Cause it
Yeah.
runs right next to the turnpike, and that's all level, and the big hill is Peterson Road and then back down Martin Park Hill. So.
and there's some development planned out in this area that's in different phases of process, so I think, as we think about Lawrence Loop in terms of like, I've heard lots of discussions about, it encompasses Lawrence. Well, no, it doesn't, because there's many neighborhoods not included in that. And one of which North Lawrence or Prairie Park or, some pieces of that. So I think part of that is as we think about this infrastructure and thinking about the priorities, as we talk about later, what does it mean to have priorities, and where do all those go in terms of people's access to kind of that higher class level of facility that we're trying to not only construct but prioritize for investments. So I'll just leave that hang there. But, okay. Are we ready to go on to the non-loop related? If you think of something or hear something, now this is on a publicly recorded meeting, please share it with us. We're happy to, if you hear something about any of these or any big things, like, we're happy to hear that, to make sure that we have prepared that sort of information, so to be able to have those conversations by the time we go to the. All right.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
next one on the list would be Tennessee and Kentucky Street. There were comments from the public as well as a few from committee members. That was also submitted into the last CIP process by a private group. And so just a discussion of Northwest Corridor. Some phrased it specifically as Kentucky and Tennessee. Some phrased it as an option between downtown and campus. There are a few other streets along there. Elevation starts to become a question as well. Currently, neither of those are on the priority or secondary network or classified as a future bikeway.
I mean, get to have the conversation to tell us what your thoughts and recommendations are for a network. Would it maybe be helpful, instead of showing this list, to show our bikeway map and zoom into some of those sections? Would that be more helpful to
Do that?
And then I assume, if we're looking at Kentucky and Tennessee, you have to decide where we're talking about. Are we talking from 6th to 19th/23rd? Are we talking about to 19th Street, to 21st Street, or to, we talk about 9th? I don't know. I'm just saying, if you want to talk about those and where they go in the network, do you start at 11th Street? Where we're after, the Vermont and New Hampshire options across. Yeah, just turn off some wires first.
Which ones do you want?
Everything off but existing Basically. Yeah.
Cause yeah, like massive is currently.
Just have to share your screen.
Technology and I get along really well. Ongoing. Okay, so a little hard to see some of this here, but we've got downtown. The orange here is the current buffered bike lane on Massachusetts Street. We got 9th is kind of our northern boundary of this view currently. And so your Tennessee and Kentucky are kind of this one space here in between. Currently, we've got future bikeway or existing facilities at 9th, 11th, and 14th are all marked as future. Massachusetts on the east side here, and this would be Louisiana on the west. That does have contraflow and shared lane markings currently adjacent to campus.
Yeah, I've often wondered if we're ready for that bikeways on Tennessee and Kentucky. I think it makes a lot of sense just because the roads they're pretty low capacity but high speeds. So adding space for a bikeway could do a lot, particularly because it's on it is a high crash corridor, and could improve walkability, could improve comfort, improve safety, do a lot for the neighborhood and just that whole area. You know, those two roads in particular, they were designated as one-way streets in the 60s after a traffic plan from Harlan Bartholomew, and just I think with little foresight to the effects that would have, except for like high speeds. I think a lot of people in the community are recognizing that even if you can drive a little faster, you may not actually get where you're going any faster, and there's so many costs to that. So I mean, I understand that it is kind of it is a big leap for a lot of people. I get that, but I also want the possibility foreclosed by not having any type of inclusion in the bike plan, even if there's still a lot more work to be done to kind of make those a reality.
Yeah, I mean, that just seems to be fighting the way the street is used today. And there's so many cars that use those two streets, and think about trying to make that safe for cyclists, or it just seems like such a challenge. So opposed by so many people who want cyclists.
I think it might be a good opportunity when it comes time for that road to be resurfaced. I don't know what its condition is classified as by the city, but when it is resurfaced and rebuilt, it would be nice to see protected facilities there, at least up until 11th, where you could then hop over to Mass and then pick up the bike lane there. Just so that my thinking is, if you take a bikeway all the way down Tennessee and Kentucky, what are you taking away from Mass Street? Because then you'd have 3 corridors right next to each other, which is great for accessibility for those neighborhoods, but cost wise doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think if you had an option between 6th and 11th along Tennessee and Kentucky for those roads to be narrowed, 1 for the safety and walkability of students in the area, 2 for the increase in property values that slower and calmer streets have on residents, and then 3 for general accessibility in the area for cyclists and pedestrians alike, with protected lane through parked vehicles being moved into that 2nd lane. I think it would be a great reuse of the street, and those projects being overlapped with The rebuild of both of those corridors could make it a little bit easier to digest, I think.
You're saying from Sixth to 11th Street, and then at 11th Street, you'd use 11th Street to get back to Mass on the.
Correct, yeah, and then connect with the existing network.
This is Chris Tilden. I'm here tonight because Jared Gabb, who represents Flat, isn't available. I concur with those last comments and believe the rationale behind that is a good one. It's certainly an area of high bike traffic, an area with a lot of opportunity as it relates to crashes and trying to reduce them. And the comment about having 3 parallel bike facilities south of 11th makes sense. So connecting that over to Massachusetts at 11th seems like a logical choice for that if facilities were to be developed on those 2 streets.
There's also future facility. I'm just going to ask a question then. There's what we have shared lane markings on Vermont and New Hampshire, but under the current, our proposed level of comfort, neither of those would qualify. I mean, that they would be future bikeways, basically, where if the markings aren't adequate, they'd be future bikeways. So you would basically have Kentucky, Tennessee, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire in this area, all be future bikeways, all 5 streets from 6th to 11th.
From Massachusetts at 6th to 11th.
It is
Okay.
currently a future bikeway.
Okay.
So this is my conversation is
Yeah.
in choosing to say, oh, maybe Kentucky and Tennessee would work. Is there a trade-off in that other space? Because you literally have 5 blocks in a row that you now have on the future bikeways network. I'm just asking that question. In terms of access to destination, in terms of realizing maybe the viability or political feasibility of implementing something protected or something of a higher, like, separate space on Vermont and New Hampshire is going to require the removal of parking. And so I'm throwing that out there as like, these are going to be conversations where you could put every street on the bikeway network. Problem is, you're still not gonna achieve things at a higher level than we have funding availability to do it, and that there's political will to have that reality.
We still have to allow cars to go through places and maybe sacrificing Kentucky and Tennessee for cars is,
You make a really good point, Jessica. If we look at Vermont, Mass, and New Hampshire, there is a lot of car traffic on those streets just to try and find parking to get to Mass. So if those roadways have space reallocated for protected bike lanes, that is a loss of parking, which residents of the city are very against. And visitors appreciate the access to parking in downtown as well. I think if you look at a realignment of Kentucky or Tennessee, that's not parking being lost. It's a through lane being lost, where you have still your leftmost lane for vehicle travel, you have that second lane now being used for parking, and then you have protected bike facilities and sidewalk and crossing improvements in that former parking lane. So you're not losing parking space if you look at Tennessee and Kentucky, depending on daylighting situations and everything. But I think Vermont and New Hampshire, and especially Mass, to meet, I think, the standards that we're looking for, you would have a large loss of parking. And it would be very costly.
At the same time, since the last bike plan, there's also been land use decisions where it used to only be parallel parking on those streets to put angled parking, particularly on many blocks of New Hampshire that have been redeveloped. So that's another consideration I think we have to think about as we think about what the plan calls for.
Yeah.
Well, one alternative solution may be to have Kentucky and Tennessee be converted back to, or reverted back to bidirectional. And that way it's not like it would, it's bidirectional calming traffic, and can increase the possibility that cyclists or more cyclists could use it. I don't know, it would ironically probably wouldn't fit within any of these metrics, like,
Yes.
but, unless you put a shared shares on it. But, it would, it's like non-bicycle infrastructure, a way to improve bicycle
Yeah.
accessibility.
So it's interesting you point that out, that exploring conversion of those one ways back to two ways is a recommendation of something to be explored in our Vision Zero plan. So.
My idea would be to take one lane of Kentucky Street from 19th to 7th Street and turn it into a two-way cycle track. And then it's in the left, that's in the left, the western lane. And then you have traffic going down the lane that's currently there. And then the parallel parking is, and so the cost would be isolating that two-way, the bicycle lane. And kids would be able to get down to the pool on a dedicated path that might mean more kids could ride down it. But it all is based on a two-way cycle track where that goes against the driving pattern, the car pattern. And is there enough width in a lane of traffic to have, can you take bikes two directions like that in a cycle? I don't know.
Not maybe every instance, but generally I would.
Yeah, and so then from 19th to 7th Street, and then there's talk of having a 7th Street to 6th Street to Constant Park. And so you would get off and go to the pool, or you go to the across and stay on the loop and go across 6th Street. And then you don't do anything to Tennessee Street. It seems like there'd be minimal cost there. And Vermont's not a great street to ride on right now, but it is a necessary street to ride on. And that would slow down Kentucky Street quite a bit, because there would just be one lane of traffic going on.
Do we know what the standard dimensions are for a cycle track, how wide they're required to be?
The 10 or 12.
You'd have to look what NACTO says. Well,
I don't want to guess, but I think it's 10.
10 minimum.
And gold bars.
What's a shared use path?
And
Shared
at a
use is
minimum.
10.
Is what?
Minimum of 10.
And yeah, and
Well, technically, I think minimum 8, but we do 10.
yeah, right.
Yeah. And where you have higher
Okay.
volume, it should be wider.
And that's takes 2 lanes. I mean, you go both directions on it on a bike.
So-
and-
I don't want to get too caught up in the details, because I think our guide for level of comfort should drive the design decision, right? So I think the determination needs to be is, where does the logical connection need to be in terms of what we think about for bikeways? What's the trigger that we want engineers, when they do complete streets work and they look at any of these streets and say, okay, it's on the bikeway, what's the appropriate solution? They have to figure, we gotta figure some of that out. So I think we can talk about it in concept, but I want us to not, I want you to know, if we end up putting a bikeway on Kentucky, it doesn't mean it's gonna be a cycle track, right? We're gonna go through a design,
Yeah, and-
yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
what makes it a cycle track, and it might be
Right.
more special. But just being able to go north and south in
Yes.
the same lane of car traffic, and so Kentucky becomes a 1-lane street for cars and 1 lane for bikes, and
Yeah.
it gets people north-south and safely.
Yeah, and maybe that has to be part of a larger conversation where the other one becomes bi-directional, there's just one lane for, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to all that. Okay. So in general, you like the idea of Kentucky and Tennessee. For sure for 6/7 to 11th, and then thinking about the 11th to 19th piece, depending on how that is, that's more whatever.
Well, on Tennessee, where would the bikes be coming from to go southbound on Tennessee? They're not gonna come down 6th Street in all likelihood, and the crossing to cross from the loop, Constant
Well,
Park
not from
is.
between Sixth and Seventh is probably not much
Yeah.
generation of trip making, unless you were taking the Pinckney underpass
Right.
and coming up along the sidewalk alignment, basically.
I think you would still have a really large catchment area with Old West Lawrence being there too, and being a relatively active neighborhood.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
so I think you would still have lots of neighbors to the west hopping on that, south of Sixth Street. It'd be interesting
Yeah.
to see if there's any public feedback that we could gather at the next open house to see if that would be an interesting connection to make.
It's really already very complicated, I think, for us to get all of those with considerations. I think it's unrealistic for us to expect to design by public committee the entire network. So I'm very hesitant to do that and complicate the issue. So
Sixth and Kentucky is a destination for bikes because, I mean, that's my
Yes.
primary
the
crossing.
crossing, yes,
Yeah.
I understood
That
what you were
crossing,
saying there,
yeah.
but that's what I was kind of asking.
Mhm.
Also,
Tennessee,
just
not
know
so much.
when we put those future bikeway dashes on the line, some of those, they're concept, right? We're saying we believe this should be a bikeway. A good example of that is when we've done other connections, like for example, 21st Street, we looked at, well, 21st Street, the future bikeway went to Osdol and we made the connection from, at Osdol back to 19th Street. But instead of, because there wasn't a signalized intersection at that point at 21st and Iowa, so that part got left just hanging there kind of as like future bikeway at that point. But I think there's opportunity for that when we get into select a project. Those logical elements have to be part of the conversation. So I'm not sure when we're talking about a system plan, I don't know that we have to vet out all those details. So I don't expect that. I just wanted to understand what your intention was so I can reflect that in my notes. So when we go back in and say, yes, the intention is to add future bikeway in Kentucky and Tennessee, how far south do you want it to go? Do you want it to go? And then that other part of the question is, do Vermont and New Hampshire and or Mass remain on the future network?
Did you ever see any of those three streets having the level of comfort that we're shooting for on this plan? With either
Other
separate
communities have made
facilities?
investments in their downtown when they focused on multimodal transportation to remove parking and make investments in biking. We've seen other communities do it. Like, I can't point to a specific one, but I've been in other urban areas where you see that off their downtown, a parallel street to like a Mass Street has bikeways of a higher nature that likely removing a travel lane or parking. So it's yes, maybe you leave it there as in the future, it's a future bikeway. And will it happen in the next 5 years before we do this plan? Probably not, but it's still a prime destination in our community to talk about active modes and how they all need to work together.
The benefits on Vermont are just massive. The cumulative benefits of having a really high quality, making downtown a fun, enjoyable destination to bike to. It's just huge.
Yes,
If you can get there, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, so we leave those. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
and I mean, generally a lot more palatable, I think, to the public than changing to Tennessee and Kentucky, but those are corridors as they are that I use all the time, and I mean, they get you to where you need to go. It's just you gotta dodge some traffic.
Well, and this goes back to our level of comfort expectations where, if the desire is, depends on who you're asking for bike comfort. Again, if the goal is, how do we get to this, what we've shown you later on a proposed thing, which is now level of comfort 1, which is the all ages and abilities thing, you're not doing that without significant trade-offs. And so the idea that that is going to happen everywhere is probably not realistic. It is the visionary goal, but there, even in the all ages and abilities guidance, there is a literal statement that says doing something that does not meet all ages and abilities can still happen, and it should not be eliminated just because you can't meet all ages and abilities. You have to ensure that you've justified why you're doing the thing you're doing, and that you still have to be, it's like intense and more intensely consider all of these. things. And so I think we're gonna have a goal knowing we're not probably gonna achieve the goal on everything. And so in the places where we're doing standalone projects, like we're investing the set aside bike ped money, those are the opportunities I think where we're gonna have the highest ability to deliver at the All Ages and Abilities Network. But I just try to be realistic, knowing what we've seen over the last 15 years of doing this work, and then thinking about how we move forward. Okay. Are we ready to move on to?
Let me, thinking politically now,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking that we think of projects, design, whatever, that benefits cyclists. But there's a cost for people who drive. And my fear is that negativity would build. And that you might not feel it immediately, but it could build to the point of, really creating us and them. So I'm very concerned about what's happening with the negative side of things.
I'm not sure how you get around that besides a culture of where you decide you're doing it and you do it and then you build a cycling cult, like what we've seen in other places. You build a following and you build users and more, you know what I mean? It's more kids or other.
In the calculation, part of the calculation should be minimizing the negative impact on those who could, at some point, really create problems.
That's really, it's hard. It's hard. I hear what you're saying, but in that same space, the negative impacts that people care about most is not being able to drive as fast and or not parking as close to their destination as they want. Those are the things that excite someone. And in both of these things, everything that biking is going to need to do to reallocate street space is going to be doing those things. Almost always in existing parts of the network, unless you're doing something off street like a shared use path, which you still then have safety concerns because of every intersection. So I hear what you're saying. I'm just challenging it a little bit to say everything this plan is doing creates discomfort for another user.
Well, at some point, you ought to be very concerned about who gets elected to the city commission.
I think what you're saying is true, and I like what you brought up here. That if you can address the parking concerns and the ability to get from one place to another and show that this is not going to interfere with that, that's a good thing. But I agree, as a cyclist, the negativity towards cyclists is a huge deal, not just because it's annoying, because it's misinformed. I think one of the things you can counter, this one just came up, my sister and I were talking about this morning, that the idea that cyclists don't pay for roads is false, and I think that needs to be addressed. I've pointed out on different forums that most roads locally are paid for through sales tax and property tax and not their car tags, and people are kind of stopped because they believe that pay for roads by driving a car. And if we can counter that and educate as we go, I think that helps at least. But one of the dangers of the negativity towards cyclists is that there are a lot of aggressive drivers. I was cold rolled today on a short ride and for no reason. I mean, he didn't have to go way around me. I didn't add 10 minutes to his commute or whatever he thought I was doing. He just decided to cold roll me. And what was funny was he was way ahead of me by the time he got the cold roll function to work. So it was just all this big cloud up there. I thought it was amusing, but that kind of stuff happens. And it happens with increasing frequency. And I think we do, as a community, need to always be talking about that. I'm not sure.
Is it actually increasing frequency?
It just seems like, but people who buzz you on the road because they just not for any reason other than you're on a bicycle and they're in a big truck and they feel like they need to let you know that they don't want you there. And Yeah, I think it is increasing in frequency. So,
Well, that and distraction, you know. I
Yeah.
think That's.
yeah, and then
Keeps
there's
growing
like
even faster.
cell phone users and stuff. Just a thought. I mean, I think every time we come, I remember when you were putting in the bicycle boulevard things on 13th Street.
Oh, our demonstration project. where
Yeah.
We were just like showing a
And
demonstration.
the neighbors were, or people were angry and they were tearing them down at night, and, you know, and the I should never read comments, but I do. I'm glad the Journal World comments section doesn't work very well anymore. Nobody uses it, but I would always read comments and then.
I think there is an opportunity as the plan is completed to really highlight the bikeway network and the fact that the effort is concentrated on a way to create a limited, compared to the available number of roads, the limited bikeway network, and to build connectivity so that cyclists have an opportunity to prioritize use of a network that in some ways can eliminate some of the cycle traffic on other roadways that are irritating to users. So hopefully there's some way to highlight the kind of limited nature of the network and that it's seeking to create connectivity and decrease the opportunity for conflict between people on bikes and people who are driving cars.
Well, I like that idea. I think immediately, like, it's like, oh, well, then bikes should stay only on that. You know, like, that's what you're gonna hear is like, oh, well, then bikes shouldn't be on any other place except for the streets that are for them.
Any big change, there's gonna be resistance, but I'm thinking like Bentonville has seemed to really embrace bikes there. But I'm sure at some point, there was a bunch of people who said, no, what are we doing with all these bikes, you know? And so, I don't know how they got through it, but I'm sure we can too, you know, but. So
It's
it'll
an
be a-
economic
it'll be a learning-
development tool.
it's
It's a
gonna be a
huge
challenge.
economic development tool in that area for sure, which I think probably changed some mindsets.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I was reading today, my sister asked me for this and because I had looked it up before, but in the Des Moines area with all their paved bike trails that they have, and, you know, in Iowa, someone did a study and they said that it was like $8 billion a year in revenue that was brought to the city because of the bike infrastructure. Because people come up there and, I mean, it isn't just in the city, it goes around to all the other little towns and, you know, little towns have set up restaurants right on there's a biker bar right on the bike path. And like that, and so people come up there and actually spend money and eat and.
Little small towns that don't have much. and-
Gary, Iowa
Yeah,
was one of my favorite, but,
me too, but
and the ice cream at that.
I hate to interrupt, I'm in interest of time, because I'm like, oh my gosh, we're almost.
No, but I think we need to look at bike infrastructure as more of a revenue producer rather than something that is a cost. And I know it's a cost, but it can also potential spring in revenue.
State's trying to do some of that work too, so
Yeah.
follow the state active transportation. Work. Okay, back to our list. North Second Street, River to Turnpike.
So currently the future bikeway and I believe it's secondary in that area goes up Third Street. And there was a suggestion, a few comments about Second Street specifically, which is the larger marked as 40 here. You can see US 40 headed out of the town as well.
That look on your face.
Sorry, there, I don't know.
That.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, there's always this tension between like, you know, most of the, or you have a lot of uses along that corridor, along 40, right? But it is not pleasant and certainly, you know, less safe. It's just, there's just always gonna be that tension.
Question is, do you want it as a future bikeway? So when you know, it gets rebuilt or projects happen, that it triggers the exploration of bike infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily mean stuff will happen. It may be decided like, oh, it's a maintenance project, and with a maintenance project, the bikeway that's needed here is outside of the scope of work or in those things. Again, it's a question. You can make every street a bikeway. Do you want to? Or in this case, I'm, you know, sure the conversation was, well, Third Street is a lot nicer, low volume alternative. And then if you have to go back to the network, you go back to Second just to the destination you're at. So it's this trade-off question we hear about all of the arterial streets that also service state highways is, do you have the bikeway on that street? Or do you have it on a parallel alternative? And I don't, there's not a right answer. So I think it's up to you, your kind of judgment in that space to decide what you want to
Is
do.
it something being looked at with the whole North Lawrence?
So in this case, I think if we want to designate it as a bikeway, we should put it as part of the network if you want to do that. I think that study is going to be looking at a lot of connections. I don't know yet. I mean, they're very early stages. They just had their first they had a visioning and an open house to kind of collect input. They have a survey still open, has over 100 responses. That they're looking at connections back to the levee. What does that look like? Because obviously Second Street is a barrier. If anybody's trying to connect to that northern part of the levee and thinking about access. So is it a crossing issue? Is it you want people to be able to bike on, you know, North Second Street? So it turns into North Third Street.
You know, I think, in a bigger perspective, I think if we could make a bikeway along North Second Street, that would add to the attractiveness of North Second Street as an entrance to the city. You know, some of the places, you know, the bike paths are really, you know, landscaped and, you know, all kinds of stuff. And if we could do that, I think we could fit into the corridor study. It fits into that attractive part of things, but I think that would be neat.
My first thought is there's so many curb cuts on the street that it would be dangerous regardless of the infrastructure that you design. But a local example of putting infrastructure on a road similar to this is in Olathe on Kansas Avenue. Took a 4-lane large roadway and converted it to 2 lanes with a large buffered cycle track on the eastern side of the roadway. And it allowed us to, one, remove some of those curb cuts and consolidate them into large lots. But 2, it's also attracting new businesses to the area. There's a huge greenscaping project up Kansas Avenue too. And the city is now looking at expanding that both north and south to continue that project past the courthouse and then further south towards the train tracks. So at first I was like, oh, that's stupid. Thinking about the tunnel underneath the train tracks and the elevation change, and then all the curb cuts. But with the North Lawrence corridor plan, it might actually be a great way to bring streetscaping, beautification, and investment to the area as well, rather than hiding it over on Third Street.
Generally supportive then? Okay. 12th Street. Billy, you want to talk about this one? I think this one came from you as a committee
I'm a
member.
fan of this one.
Okay.
Go 12th Street from Oregon Street, from the Burroughs Creek Trail, from Haskell Street to into South Park. And that's a much, that's to me would be, more kids would be able to ride down that road than a 13th Street bike boulevard where they're constantly getting in and out of traffic. And I don't know if you could put a like a concrete crown on down the center of 12th Street, and bikes would ride on that and cars would have to avoid the crown. And so that cars could still, you know, would still be driving on it, but it's a little used street. And I'm a big fan of 12th of that. And 13th Street is still a wonderful place to ride your bike today, and people could continue to ride on that one as they so desire.
I think I'm just gonna tell some history about 13th Street. So 13th Street for a long time had been on the previous approved traffic calming list when the Traffic Safety Commission used to exist many moons ago. And as part of that, they had clocked people in the PM peak going 70 miles an hour on that residential street. That is now part of the neighborhood traffic management program, signed as 25. At the time, it may have been signed at 30. They clocked people at 70 during the PM peak. And knowing that it connects between Massachusetts Street and Haskell, so further than the Burroughs Creek Trail, where 12th Street does, it had been the previous preferred alignment to explore for like a neighborhood calm street, because it had the benefit of, well, 12th Street is already a route people could use if they want something lower speed or lower volume. So you bring the benefit of traffic calming to a street like 13th Street to connect these two higher volume components, and you get a more comfortable street for all the users. So that's.
And 12th Street with the sidewalk program, their city's replacing all the sidewalks, and so there's now a bump out at 12th and Connecticut Street that makes crossing that street that much closer. I mean, I don't know how far it bumps out, 8 feet or 6 feet, and so it's less of a crossing
So
than it was.
Those could be proposed. So if you would do something, depending on where you would do it, and looking at the bikeway, shortening crossing distances could be a reality, I think,
Yeah,
on either street.
yes, at 13th Street also.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I wonder, is there political support in the neighborhood for
Yes.
for paving 12th Street?
Oh. I don't know if that's necessarily a requirement for bikes. I mean, I ride on brick I mean, I live right there, and so I'm riding on brick streets in that neighborhood pretty regular, and it's tough if you're riding your road bike and your, skinny tires. But you just can't, you gotta slow down a little bit and accommodate to the street that you're on. And that's why I made the suggestion of, some kind of a crown of concrete in the center of the street for bicycles to use. And cars could then be partially on it as they use it, but it's a little used street, so it doesn't have much traffic on it. And so it would be a good share the road thing to have a concrete pathway down the center of it. And I think that there would be support for that.
I don't know that I've seen any, that's like a Phil idea. I don't know that I've seen
Yeah,
any.
it's a fill.
I was like, I'm just saying that because I don't know that engineering, that there is a design,
Yeah.
like an approved bikeway design, that would be where we would design something with a raised or.
Although that idea didn't come from me, I got it from somebody who moved here from Seattle, from the Northwest.
Okay.
So I assume
Okay.
they saw it someplace out there.
Love
but
to know that.
Because it seems like it would introduce safety hazard for the cyclists, especially if you're talking about kids. That, because you're in between the lanes of traffic, and if you need to turn in one way or the other, you're.
And this street is not it's not a well-used car street either. So.
I will say, so we have a brick plan, and that makes it pretty hard to pave over brick. So if that's what we're working
Yeah.
with, that's what.
So
Yeah.
the conversation also is that
They asphalt.
but part of the conversation in the bikeway, in the brick policy is that if a street is designated as the bikeway, then it's not desirable in brick. So you would force a material other than brick if it was a bikeway. That those streets aren't eligible to be rebuilt in brick if it's intended to be a bikeway. Because of the conflict.
I feel like that would become a political conversation with residents and.
How does a brick road impact a level of comfort for, say, a child or a beginner rider too? Because can't speak for that as a more seasoned rider. I don't have too big of a problem with it. No, as you mentioned, it's uncomfortable on a skinny tire bike, but how is level of comfort impacted by brick roads?
I would say it's less desirable for less predictable riders and children, or like that all ages spectrum on the ends. I would think that makes it less predictable. That's anecdotal though,
Yeah.
just from my experience. Like you have to watch out if there's cracks in pavement and other things when you're biking with children. Make sure they pay special attention to not getting caught in grates and other things if you're biking with them on the road, particularly.
The one thing I was thinking of is the conflict between brick roads being great or
Jen said,
Uh,
good job.
yeah,
I was waiting for, yeah. it's-
brick roads are great for traffic calming because they naturally make you go slower just because of the
Yeah.
oscillations in the car and everything. But again, for cycling or pedestrian mobility, 13th does seem to be a good option for further improvements to make a wider spanning corridor too. I think it's 13th to Oak Hill and then down Elmwood would connect you to 15th out of town. And then 13th goes straight up to campus. So that's a long through street. That would be great for traffic calming and bike infrastructure in the future. And still have connectivity to South Park, of course, with the Mass Street improvements.
We just don't want too much traffic calming on 13th. I mean, a bike boulevard is some other option that,
So in the new level of comfort, we can talk about that. The level of comfort guide helps drive the decision about the design. And so based on the design, speed and volume in that proposed, do you want to share that real quick? I think the key in that is that there is an option. Sorry, I got too many papers. Thank you. In that option, there is in that shared street space, there is a bicycle boulevard designation in the new proposed. If you look at that color chart, look at the color chart on the first one. And at the bottom two row in the shared street column on the top chart, the row that says shared street has a bicycle boulevard and then streets with traffic calming. So you can have a shared street that has traffic calming that doesn't deflect other users. About the difference between a bicycle boulevard and a street with traffic calming is that one prioritizes bikes. So if the volume or speed is too high, it can use turning restrictions or other restrictions, right, in the thing to limit volumes of cars because you're designating that as a priority street for bikes. I think what I'm hearing is that's the part you are not necessarily in support of. But this level of comfort design guide separates shared street where you could, if you design it as the bikeway and you can get your speed and volume into these ranges, you can do a street with traffic calming as a shared street without having the elements that make it exclusively a bike boulevard.
and what I would want to, I mean, if I'm a parent and my kids, I want to send them off to the store on their bike for the first time. I'm not gonna send them down 21st Street where they constantly have to ride in the lane of traffic and always be looking, just, is there a car back there? Is there a car back, because you have to merge into the lane of traffic so many times over that 7 blocks.
There's a lot of nuance there, I think, in terms of how old of a kid is before you're sending them out to bike on a street versus a lot of kids we see ride on sidewalks in the sidewalk environment because of how they operate and ride, whether whatever is safer. So I hear what you're saying, but part of that has to do with the elements of what type of traffic calming you choose also. And so the thing that we've had conversation about that before, that some of the chicanes where you have to move in this space is not something you view as a desirable bikeway element, but likewise, you can do humps and dips too, which also slow people, you know what I mean? Or there's other pedestrian islands or other curb bump outs that do some of those similar things without necessarily making you feel like you're veering.
Yeah, but
operation.
just as an example, today we rode and we always end up on the 21st Street Bike Boulevard for a block to get to Louisiana Street. And to do that, it's that whole block that I ride on 21st Street, I'm in a lane with traffic. And there's a car coming directly behind me, and we're both in the same lane, and they're supposed to politely wait for me and only pass if it's safe. And I don't want to have to. I want to be riding in a lane that is all mine, and that where I know that a car isn't going to come up from behind me, and if I don't notice it, they might run me over. Because that's what cars do. And so I want to be away from the car as I ride down a street. And with traffic calming, I mean, I don't want to have to ride in the same lane as a car, and that 21st Street Bike Boulevard forces me to do that. And 13th Street right now is a wonderful street to ride your bike on.
But it's a shared street. I mean, you're operating in the street.
Sure.
With all users together with no
But I can
drive
stay to the
lane or
right.
regulations.
But I can stay to the right,
And you
and
hope
there's
that the car
there's
doesn't
plenty of
veer in.
room for them to go around me.
And you hope that the car, no matter the speed they're traveling,
But
doesn't veer into you.
It's more likely if I'm in the same lane, although, I also assert myself and I ride in the lane and say, you better not pass me because I'm here. But that's not what we're trying to get to, and we're trying to get to a place where more riders are able to feel comfortable riding in that street, and I think that Sharrows give you a false sense of that, and so
Sharrows
does the
are-
Bike
So
Boulevard.
like Sharrows are no longer a facility type.
Good.
So that's one of the things we heard last time you said
Yeah.
you don't want to see that Sharrow. It doesn't mean that Sharrows may not still be used in addition to traffic calming if you're trying to tell, like if it's used specifically to tell people how to position themselves when you're in a place that's already designed as a shared street, but as a carte blanche, like a facility type, that's not the case. And the challenge I'm having, Phil, in this conversation is trying to understand that you don't want to, as like not wanting to operate in a shared space, but yet there are bikeways and there will be bikeways along our network that are going to be shared streets. And that's part of the network. And the goal in this is using the design elements to impact the speed and volume of cars in that street to make the street feel more comfortable. You're using the tools in the spaces where you intend to have bikes as part of the network for lower volume streets, that there isn't going to be a guaranteed space for bikes on all streets. That's part of the all ages and abilities guide, is to use the design elements to impact driver behavior to make it safer. So even if there is a crash, it's at lower speeds and volumes where lives aren't lost in that space. So there's this dichotomy, because what I hear you say is, I do this, I like this street, it's wide, I can use it, it's a shared street, but it's wide enough that I feel like I have my own space. But the reality is, in a lot of streets, we don't have that benefit, right? There's trade-offs. Like the reason you can use that space on 13th Street is because no one parks there, because what we've heard from neighbors, I don't park there because we know you get hit because people drive too fast. And so it's these trade-offs between like, oh, if you slow the street and then people use it to park there, they now feel like they can park there, then you may not, I don't know. I'm saying there's like all these things to balance in the consideration of thinking about the whole network. And we as a community, no community can afford to build visually or physically separated bikeways on all of their streets. They have to use some of these low cost solutions for shared streets to be able to make streets that are not prioritized for cars more comfortable for all riders. And I think we've tried to listen to what you said about this proposed level of comfort to bring those even down more. Like if you look at the difference between what we had before and what we have now, we're recognizing that the expectations for that are less vehicles, less speed. And so deciding like where we want that to happen. Do you want it to be on the street where it's already slower, it's brick, people have to travel? faster, but it doesn't go all the way through as a trade-off, you know, because it already kind of works for some people? Or do we really want to say this is the connecting street? We know that it would be a friendlier neighborhood street for all users if we choose this other alignment. And I think that's the ultimate question in this 12th Street versus 13th Street thing. Anyway, I'm just trying to like challenge the idea of it, what you're pressing to me is based on an old standard. We looked at a new standard to address some of the concerns. Have we overcome them? You know what I mean? Have we overcome those yet? What's the preferred route then from the collective about connectivity and desired level of comfort?
I'm more comfortable riding on less used streets than I am on more used streets. And I'm more comfortable not being forced to ride in the same lane as a car. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And 13th Street is a very comfortable street for me right now.
Is 13th currently a shared lane room?
No.
No,
I mean, it's
it's just a road.
it's a wider than average local street.
Sure, I've heard that before, but I can't remember.
It's a residential street. It's signed 25.
Yeah, there's only parking on one side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Is there any other community or any other committee feedback on this one?
Aside from, I think 13th Street would improve accessibility to ease and hassle much more than 12th Street would. Just because it's closer to the, can't use these words, but the EJ zone. Just south 15th, north of 19th Street, basically the housing floor. It's closer, it's more, so it is just more accessible. I think that's
To
why.
populations who are more likely to use active transportation.
Yes.
And the Burrows Creek Trail is the north-south route and come into Hobbs Park and at 10th Street, ride downtown.
Our last,
13th Street, and you know, just the fact that 12th Street's brick and that's not eligible for, you know, bikeways. You need to pave it in order to do that with 13th Street right there with the advantages of the longer distance makes a lot more sense to me.
our last one in this section would be Iowa. We had a variety of comments on Iowa. Really throughout, we did break it into some smaller sections here, just because of areas that are already designated. So our first one here would be 6 to Irving Hill Road. Irving Hill Road is the bridge over Iowa. It's where the most recent construction, that was the terminus of that. Just south of Bob Billings there. That is currently not is not a future bikeway. So
I mean, it's a future repaving project, part of that. That's already probably past a design stage.
So that's not listed as any currently. The further south would be the, because we do have shared use path was added as part of that project. So this map is actually not even fully up to date because of last week. There is shared use path now along Iowa here up to the Irving Street Bridge. So there's shared use path from there down to 23rd. Once you get south of 23rd, that is currently future bikeway. But it is not currently on the priority or secondary network.
I mean, I use that shared use path along Iowa all the time. It's super helpful and I would like to see it extend further north. At least up to 9th. Cause 6th Street's kind of a no man's land for anything other than that weird intersection of cars, but I'm interested to see what other people think as well.
The 6th Street, Harvard to 6th Street to Harvard improvements is in design now. So it's not design.
Okay.
So
Any other support for 9th to Irving?
6 to Irving.
Well, Hayden's, we
Oh.
put 6 to Irving.
Uh-huh.
Hayden's saying 9th to Irving because it would
Okay.
connect to the next bikeway connection.
It's 9th and 6th on Iowa is,
Yeah.
forget it. Can't even imagine where you could put a shared use.
Because you've got
All those.
the ramp from.
Yeah, so the public comment was 6 to Irving. Hayden's suggesting 9th
Yeah.
to Irving.
Makes more sense.
Okay, general support. Next.
Areas of interest, these are all areas that are already classified as a future bikeway. Some of them are actually already shared lane marking, which moving forward would be considered just a future bikeway. But so these are already in the network. They've already been, considered a part of the process. Are there any on this list that stand out for specific comment before we move to the intersections?
Because they are already on future bikeways and people called for us to have them on the network, we're saying, we don't believe there needs to be any changes necessarily in the plan, but we wanted to call them to your attention. They could be locations where, as we talk about priorities, which I think we're gonna need to have a whole separate meeting, like we're getting close to our end, which is fine. I wanted you to have a diligent discussion. So my thought is in, one of the first couple weeks of January, we just keep the same rest of your agenda items and let you have a holiday and come back and we'll talk about the priority stuff after this item. That's what I'll kind of propose, if that sounds okay, but those would be ones where I would say, look at that list in terms of if we're making changes to the priority or secondary networks in that conversation as things that you may want to consider if they're not already there, because they're the places people were asking for other improvements. Okay. Last list.
21st Mass to Burrows Creek Trail. I mean, if you go down to 23rd Street, there's the potential for a sidewalk, a 1-block sidewalk between Barker and Leonard Street. And, but as we were riding today, we wanted to go north. And we realized we'd have to go to 19th Street for that, and but that's not a comfort street for me riding. Although it does have a bike lane and that'd be good, but. So that's talking about the 1-block long sidewalk on 23rd Street and connecting. Building that out.
The 21st Street, are you talking about the 23rd Street?
Well, it says 21st Street, Massachusetts to Burrows Creek Trail.
Yeah, so
And
there is,
21st Street ends at Barker Street. And so if there was a way to go straight through there, that would be.
there's a future line already on the map between Barker and Leonard.
Okay.
So it's through property.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I'm
not a
for it.
street
Okay,
alignment.
that
So
would be a
that's
good.
part of a future network.
Uh-huh.
Unless it gets added to a prioritized network, it would have to be a standalone project to explore feasibility of. Right now, it's a visionary line on the map.
Through the, I mean, it's private property, but it's a
Yeah.
lane that goes from Barker to Leonard.
It's a line.
On the intersections, again, many of these are already on a priority network or secondary. Some of them are signalized crosswalks. We tried to designate whether they were just paint or if there was additional infrastructure in the area. Some of them we would just kind of draw attention to because just to put certain updates into the public record reminders. South Iowa Street at the Lawence Loop, there is a bridge planned as part of the K10 expansion. That would be a non-grade crossing, so that'll go up and over Iowa Street. Um,
So, yeah, so previously in the bikeway plan, we just have segments. We think about it as segments along the network. And I think there's an interest in not only identifying each of those segments, but to identify some specific, those crossing improvement interests. So that we could list these along with whatever else we determine as we go through this draft process to as like specific projects that then get scored, assuming if they're on the priority or secondary network for funding, for standalone funding.
Is the Sixth and Kentucky project complete already, that signalized intersection improvement?
The most recent work there is complete. It was a comment that we received.
Okay.
So that might be that they haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
It might be that they still have concerns.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah.
I know, I believe Chris mentioned that in a comment earlier in the chat as well. Hearing concerns about the Sixth and Kentucky crossing. I think that is one that will be interesting to see, you know, how people feel about it after a little bit of after more familiarity with that space. That the pedestrian island was expanded, and it has always been signalized there.
Yeah,
but
I like that house.
Yeah, it is definitely improved. Cars don't yield to pedestrians very well, and there were 2 pedestrians in there today, and cars turned right in front of them, and
Yeah,
which happens all over, but.
well, and I've seen in some cities, they'll have like where there's a right turn arrow, it will say no right turn on the red arrow. So for those people coming through there, and that will be a red arrow when the crosswalk light is on. Now they can do that, and they can put up signage so that nobody can make a right turn.
I think a lot of the feedback that I saw with intersections and that I've heard from other people is, one, some of the intersections are just very long, and there's not much you can do about that, especially with like 6th Street. Or Iowa, but timing. So the time between pressing that button to cross the street and actually getting a signal. But also potentially having a lead time, so pedestrian leading interval. Compared to immediately competing with cars as soon as that light turns green. That's a lot of the feedback that I've heard, is having a leading interval.
We have a proposed grant application out to explore pedestrian leading interval on safe routes to school crossings and some other spaces, but that we haven't heard back about yet. But yeah, I think that's on the priority.
Yeah.
I just think very well.
Yeah, just press it as much as possible. It starts yelling wait and a deeper, louder tone.
To be respectful of time, it's 7:30. I would like to allow us to defer all of our items from 2 to 4 to a future meeting. We'll schedule for the first couple of weeks of January, still before our planned open house. So you can have an opportunity to sit with a few of these more things and think about them. And we can continue to draft some content and bring some other stuff back to you. That gives you enough time to have a full conversation of all those items, so we don't have to.
I would like to add for agenda item 4, just so that you're aware of the changes. A lot of the recommendations remain the same as what we brought to you previously. We did add a few based off of the discussion around temporary traffic control. But then the other new addition to that would be prioritization, resource allocation, and potential responsible parties. So those are the 3 new columns in there. The priorities were based off of the survey that the steering committee did earlier in this process. So, you know, look at those again, see if that's still kind of the ranking that you want to see. Resources are based mostly on internal costs, staff costs, and resources needed. And then the partner organizations, we are not assigning anything to anybody, but please read through those, and that'll be a discussion that we can kind of have at the next meeting as well.
Because it's a brainstorm and it's going to take the community, I think, to achieve this. And so think about that as you read that. If you're the organization you belong to is listed as some of the partners in those spaces, it's like, how do we do that call to action to think about our shared responsibility in implementing this plan? So, okay. please contact us if you have any questions in the interim, although we will be having some time off for the holidays as well, so. But we will get something on the schedule soon for any day, right? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.